We are moving into Pisces season. By the time you watch this video, the sun may have already moved into Pisces. So that's kind of what defines our astrological seasons. The other planets may be occupying other signs, but the sun takes 30 degrees, 30 days to move through each sign and makes that whole trip around the zodiac in a year. And on that day of the season when the sun is in Pisces, when the moon meets her, that creates the new moon. So every new moon is a conjunction between the sun and the moon. And that's what's happening astronomically. Astrologically, we think about the sun as being our shining self, what we aspire towards in the world. But it can be our vocation, but it's our aspiration. And the moon takes the place of our feeling heart, our psychological history, just like the face of the moon carries those marks of her long history. We too carry those marks on our soul of our personal history, and we carry those memories. So the moon plays that role in our charts of holding how we nurture ourselves, our self-care, how we carry our emotional and psychological histories. So when the sun and the moon meet up each month, it's like a refreshment of that deep psychological self in the heart of the sun. So the moon laps the sun, right? So she goes around 12 times in 1 year. And each time she meets the sun, it's the renewal of that cycle. So that's what we experience with the new moon. Every new moon is a new beginning. It's a chance to wipe the slate clean. It's a chance to dwell for a few days in that sacred darkness and refresh and renew ourselves. Ideally, if the world was set up the way I would love it to be, we would all take a pause during those 3 days of the new moon and take time for quiet and meditation and to set not so much goals for the coming month, but intentions. How do we want to be over the coming month? And that's part of the purpose of why we get together and do these new moon activations. What we want to activate is that aspiration for the coming month, that renewal of the emotional and psychological and spiritual self. So the new moon happens in a different sign every month of the year. That makes sense, right? Because it's when the moon meets up with the sun. And those differences between each month at the new moon give us the opportunity to work on different aspects of ourself and to work on different perceptions of the world. We're working on each new moon, and for that whole lunation of 29 days, we're working in the realm of that sign. So we're sitting here at that most sacred time of the year, Pisces season, when we come to the last sign of the zodiac. The moon and sun are meeting up in very early Pisces, so 1 degree Pisces, the very beginning of Pisces. All of Pisces season kind of plays the same role in the year that the new moon plays in the month, in that we begin again with Aries. Aries is the new zodiacal year. Aries is the beginning, so Pisces is the end where everything comes to dissolve. So it's a really beautiful moment with that Pisces new moon to think about, what do I want to release in order to move into what is in the Northern Hemisphere for us here, the springtime, the spark of life that we experience with Aries. What do I want to release? What spiritual pursuits do I want to integrate more into my daily life? Pisces is all of that. Pisces is the place of release and dissolution. It's the cosmic ocean. It's the sign of the poet, the mystic, the yogi, the teacher. So we all get to be honorary Pisces for this month, and we get to really initiate that time in our year with that new moon, which is coming up, I believe, on Sunday. So that's every Pisces new moon, right? Every year, that's our opportunity to go through this initiatory process of release and rebirth. It's going to be a little bit different each year, depending on what else is happening in the living sky. And it's going to have, and the impact that it has on you personally has to do with where that new moon lands in your chart. And one of the things that we talked about when we embarked on this series was the idea of choosing people whose sun sign reflects that new moon. And depending on when in that month you were born, you may experience a really big new beginning with this new moon, or it may be more subtle. we look at other placements in the chart, like what else is going on in the sign of Pisces or the sign across from it, Virgo, to really, long story short, we're looking for close conjunctions of that new moon with important placements in your chart. And that's what tells us whether this new moon is a really significant new beginning for you in life, or it's just like your average, beautiful monthly new beginning. So that's kind of a recap of how the whole thing works. Like, what is a new moon? What does it mean for us personally and astrologically? What's actually happening in the sky? But this month, we do have a couple of significant shifts in the sky this year in 2023. Some of our slower moving planets, Saturn for one, who changes signs every 2.5 years, and Pluto for another, who changes signs every 15 to 20 years, depending on the sign, are both changing signs this spring. So that's going to bring for all of us a significant tonal shift. I think when we get together next month, I'll speak to Pluto. But this month, what's really important to think about is that planet Saturn, think about Saturn, the last of the visible planets, farthest out of the visible planets. And for the ancient astrologers, Saturn represented the edge of the known planetary system. He was what stood between us and the open wilderness of the cosmos. And he still plays that role in our psyche. Boundaries, limits, authority, what stands between us and completely dissolving into oneness. So Saturn helps us to materialize and crystallize things. He helps us to own our inner authority. He helps us to deal with authority, and he helps to grow us up. We all know the Saturn return that we experience 2 or 3 times in life is a time of getting a stress test on how grown up we are. Saturn's all about growing us up. So when he changes signs, we really are shifting our approach to how we mature ourselves, how we deal with boundaries, and how we deal with the structures of our lives. And that happens once every 2.5 years. And that affects all of us, no matter what your sign is. You're going to feel this because it affects the collective. So what we're getting with this new moon is a little preview. As the sun and moon move into Pisces, as they do every year, the moon every month, it kind of prefigures what we're all going to experience when Saturn on March 7th moves into Pisces. And the context for this is Saturn has been in a couple of really challenging signs. So we've had 5 or 6 years of Saturn in what we say in his rulership. So Saturn being super strong Saturn, very boundaried, very, we think of things like isolation and contraction when we think about a strong Saturn. So that's how we've been experiencing Saturn for the last 5 years. We can feel this in our own lives. We can see it in the world around us. Saturn in Pisces is a whole different Saturn. Saturn in Pisces truly is like the guru, the spiritual teacher, the artistic teacher, the famous poet, the bard. That is Saturn in Pisces. He is bringing us into a place where we're all going to be experiencing more flow, but we're going to need to work on our boundaries in a different way. So that's really the question to be sitting with for most of this month. What does that Piscean energy feel like as I sit with it? Because this is going to be one of the most important moods and tones of the time for the next 2.5 years. From very rigid boundaries to very fluid, open boundaries. And yes, that feels like a relief when we move into it, but it carries its own challenges. So the constriction of the last 5 years is opening into flow, but the kind of growth and maturity, the Saturn keyword of maturity that we're going to be doing over this 2.5 years has to do with what does it really mean to maintain a fluid but healthy boundary? If you're just going to maintain a rigid boundary, there's sort of a list of 1, 2, 3 things to do that. It's pretty clear what we need to do that. To maintain a healthy but fluid boundary is a much bigger challenge to our psyches and just to our daily life. And that's what we're going to be doing for the next 2.5 years. So the kinds of intentions that we want to carry with us as we enter into this month are the intention to explore that wherever it lands in our own chart. Wherever the Pisces house is in your chart is where you're going to be exploring that fluidity of boundaries, that connection to the divine, and to however you conceptualize that. your connection to the group mind and to the mystery. That's Pisces. So it's a lot of Pisces that we're coming up into, more than we've had for a long time. So we can all look back 30 years to the last time that Saturn was in Pisces. And you will see a resonance with what you'll be experiencing over the next 2.5 years. And it gives this new moon extra importance because the sun and the moon are sitting there where Saturn will soon be sitting. And it's really one of the biggest changes of the whole year. And it will see us through the next 30 years. So our job, I think, is to make sure that we're spending more time. First of all, there's that retrodiction. We need to look back and think about what have been the rigidities, what has been the isolation, what has been the difficulty, challenge, and call to maturity that has been so challenging for the last 5 years. What do I want to carry forward from that? How have I really grown and become really strong? But then where are the places where I know I need to soften because of what I've experienced, the hardness and challenges that I've experienced in the last 5 years? Where is that serving me? Where does it need to soften? And where can I allow myself to open into faith, right? Pisces is a Jupiter-ruled sign, and Jupiter is all about faith. So we're moving from the solidity, hard work, and crystallization of Capricorn Aquarius into the faith and fluidity of Pisces. And it sounds beautiful, but it carries its own challenges. So
Bronwyn, would it
yeah.
imply that there's going to be more faith, like kind of crisis work, or questioning your faith, or revisiting what you thought you believed, what felt so certain for you, maybe like a feeling that the ideology that you upheld and brought you comfort and stability is something that you might start to question now?
Yeah.
Is that the kind of more fluid boundary work that you're talking about?
I think we'll see that both in its positive and in its shadow manifestation, both as, like you're saying, a crisis of faith or a questioning of faith, and really coming to a more refined understanding of how and where we place our faith, and a loosening of rigidity, which, I mean, there's some other things which we'll talk about next month with Pluto and Aquarius, where there's some of that rigidity and polarization that we're not going to be letting go of right away. But I think Saturn and Pisces will start to be a balm on some of the rigidities that have developed. That's the positive that we can hope for. The shadow Pisces is when we lose ourselves, not in that, it's like the difference between losing yourself in drunkenness and losing yourself in meditation. There's a qualitative difference between those two. Those are both Jupiterian, Neptunian, Piscean activities. And one's the shadow of the other. And they're also both natural human activities, but anytime we're sitting in Pisces energy, it's a time to look at our shadow comforts and the ways that we lose ourselves that may not be as healthy and adaptive as they could be. And that runs the whole spectrum, from substances to beliefs to fanaticism to, there's lots of shadow Pisces that we can work with, and we all have it somewhere. And with Saturn being there, it does give us the opportunity to kind of work with that in a more nuanced way within ourselves, and maybe have a more heartful perspective on those places within ourselves. That the thing with both Capricorn and Aquarius, where Saturn has just been, is it's a little bit of a rigid taskmaster, and that can be good. Like, we need hard Saturn sometimes to just face life and to strengthen ourselves. But it's also important that process of Pisces, the process of forgiveness, compassion, and self-forgiveness also lives in Pisces. So altogether, a more heartful, nuanced, and forgiving approach to those places where our more shadowy Piscean needs come up. So yeah, it can manifest for some people as a crisis of faith, for others as a conversion or a coming into a kind of faith and belief. a return to artistry and fluidity. I already see this happening for a lot of people, a return to a creative practice that's been abandoned for 4 years or even 30 years, just because the urge is there for it. I think our sense of hope, which has been taken a few blows, will be coming back online. Really interesting and strange thing that I've noticed in myself is just a heightening of my senses. Like, it feels like I can taste and smell things better. I can hear better. My senses have felt kind of muted for a few years. And I think even things like that, just our sensitivity to the energetics of the world, will have a chance to come back online more fully. With that can come pain, but also beauty. And Keith, since you live in Pisces land all the time, I'm sure you're really familiar with working with that axis of, positive and negative Pisces and the familiarity with flow states in all of their different forms. And I wonder if you have some wisdom of how you have worked with that yourself, just as a Pisces person, how you've worked with, yeah.
Well, it's interesting, the word that you used more than once is boundary, and the fluidity of boundary. And as somebody who experiences a lot of what you're talking about in Pisces land, having a sense of boundary is super important, because there is what I would always describe as a bit of sensitivity or vibiness to what's going on around. And without a clear boundary, that can really start to have an impact on me and my emotional state and on my soul. But at the same time, balancing between being too guarded or having too strong a boundary to the point where it becomes a wall of impenetrability that blocks me out from other people or other people from me. So it's this kind of constant balancing act of figuring out how much boundary to have and how much boundary to let go of, so that there can be this access to service and this access to being able to feel what needs to be felt in order to exist in a good place for myself, but also to be of some sort of service to someone else.
And both dance and service being such beautiful Pisces keywords, right? It's that's the really the highest call of our Pisces placements, is to be of service through our sensitivity, our artistry, and our spirituality. And for the Pisces person, I mean, and this takes a different form for all of us with water sign placements, that exquisite sensitivity to the energetics around you is something that has to be reckoned with, and that is a constant dance. You never land on the right way to handle it, because it's situational. It changes depending on what's around us. And I think we just come to a maturity with it, and we find, hopefully we come to a maturity with it. It sounds like you have. But that sensitivity.
I feel like I have. I mean, like anything else. I think it's a learning curve, and it's a constantly shifting landing pad where once I figured out what I needed to figure out, well, I have to figure it out again.
Yeah,
it's not fixed. So
you were speaking kind of about the shadow and light side of being a Pisces, where so in Pratyahara, it's a technique, you could say, of withdrawing your senses, let's call 5 main ones, in order to go into a deeper flow state internally. To understand your own internal landscape and what your soul is speaking to you and what you need to listen to. And you can only do that by kind of withdrawing from the outer world, so to speak. But what seems like such a gift for Keith, and is his ability to move out and reach into other people through all 5 senses. You don't just experience Keith through what you hear him saying, but through the way he uses his hands and reaches to you, you know, through a physical practice, and through just his innate sense of being able to read or intuit people through, and then to communicate with you in the best possible way, or through always through what you hear, what you see, and what you feel, you know, through a connection with him. And so I guess what I'm hearing Keith say, and what you might be saying or validating, is that for a person who is a Pisces, this is kind of a gift and a thing that can get overwhelming or need to be worked with.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. And Bronwyn, is there anything you wanted to add in for this before we depart? And
I'm excited for this month. One of the biggest changes of the year is coming up here 3 weeks into this lunation. And for those of you that do a new moon ritual, I recommend that everyone do a new moon ritual, even if it's as simple as pouring a little dish of clear water, lighting a candle, and sitting with your journal, and sitting with the question, what is being conceived? And I like that question because it's collaborative with the universe, right? You're not saying, what do I want to create, or what do I intend? You're saying, what is being conceived? And just taking that time to reflect on, what do I notice in my life that may be these little seeds that are just starting to sprout? What does that look like? You may not know what they're going to grow into yet, but taking that meditative time to reflect on that, especially in the context of Piscean ideas and imagery. If you can take some time like that on Sunday, those taking just a few moments every month is such a powerful ritual to integrate in your life, into your life, and I can't recommend it enough. So that's what I would like to close with, is just, as always, encouraging everyone to create your own personal new moon ritual of some kind, which really is just about taking the time for self-reflection on that area of your life.
yeah,
That it'll bring rewards. It really will.